Thanks very much, Andrew. Well, I think you all know why I'm here. It's pretty clear that I'm here as a psychologist to analyse your behaviour and to read your minds. So that's exactly what I'm doing from this stage this morning. No, not at all. Of course I'm not here to talk about that. What I am here to talk about is my retirement research. And I've been working in this area for about 10 years now, looking at retirement planning and retirement adjustment from a psychological perspective. And I strongly believe in the area that I research in, mainly because I know how much of a need there is out there. When we look at the multipurpose household survey, there's about 1 million people at the moment who are over the age of 45 and working without a plan for retirement. So there's a huge need. And that's why I so much appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all today, because I am a very strong advocate of professional advice and professional planning. I think there's a huge need for it, and I can see the link between the work that you do and the work that I do, because we're both interested in the same thing, and that is trying to improve wellbeing in retirement and to wellbeing across the life journey. So thanks for being here today. During today, I'm going to talk about some statistics. I'm going to talk about some of my research, and if anything resonates with you and you would like to get hold of that information, then just email me or connect on LinkedIn. You'll also see some great resources on the Portfolio Construction website about other presentations that I've done about the psychological applications of my research to retirement planning. Now, I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for some generous supporters of my research, and the people that I especially wanted to acknowledge were Portfolio Construction Forum, Graham Rich, who's up the back there. Thank you, Graham. Challenger. The two teams of Challenger tables down here, thank you guys for your support as well. I'm very appreciative of your commitment to my research. And the other group's National Seniors Australia, they're currently sponsoring some of the research that I do related to retirement planning. So I think it's important to when we talk about the emotional side of retirement, we really can't get away from this link between expectations. So when we talk about, sorry, I'm going backwards here, which is potentially the story of my life. When we talk about retirement planning, I thought it would be a good idea if we could get clear in our minds this case of Ben and Nancy, because this is how you would see Ben and Nancy. Ben and Nancy would be sitting across the table from you, and you would recognise them as these two people. And I thought it would also be worthwhile to better understand their story. Now, fortunately, Ben and Nancy have a very astute advisor who's collected a lot of additional information about their case. So we've heard a little bit about Ben and Nancy already from Andrew. This is the more detailed story of Ben and Nancy. So Ben's been an engineer and he's retired. He's married to Nancy. She's a carer at home. She's been looking after Ben's parents for a few years now. She's noticing that she's starting to forget things, she's starting to miss appointments, she's getting a bit anxious about the fact that she's forgetting. And Ben's retired, he's been working for 42 years, so he's over it. He's had enough of work and now he just wants to relax. So he's got a vague idea of what he wants to do in retirement. He wants to spend more time with his children, he wants to spend more time with his parents, but beyond that, not really much else. He's physically fit. We know he's got a good longevity profile. And Nancy has a strong history of blood pressure, and now she's developing arthritis. Now, they've got a wide circle of friends, so lots of social support. They've got a plan to renovate their house, and that's what they're doing as a project in retirement. Now, Ben takes care of all the financial decisions and Nancy has very little involvement. Now, I want you to think about this case study as we work through it, of Ben and Nancy, and how my research might help you provide advice that's evidence-based based on our research. The advisor in this case knows that the chances of Ben and Nancy being well adjusted in retirement is about 2/3. But she, like me, wants to push it as close to 100% as she can, and she's going to use some of the evidence that she's collected during the roadshow to be able to help her to do that, to be able to push that closer to 100%. So I think one of the most important things to think about when we look at the emotional side of retirement is managing expectations. So we all know that there's a strong association between retirement adjustment and money. It's true. But what does money mean? Does it mean different things to different people? And how much is enough? And does that vary? Well, it does, as I'm sure you all well know, but here's some actual research evidence. When you have a look at the profile there, you'll see some interesting things. We asked people what was their current income in retirement, and you see that there's a wide range of different scores in terms of the amount of salary that people collect. But you'll also notice that there are different ratings around if they think they're comfortably well off, just enough, or not enough. So there's a wide variation in the scores. Now, if you look at the very top, you'll see that there's someone at 208,000 and above who's got just enough. I felt really sorry for them for about 15 seconds when I realised that as a university professor, I will never earn $208,000. I would love to be able to retire on that much money. But I guess if you were earning $2 million a year and now you had $208,000 to live off of, it might seem like quite an adjustment. But have a look down the bottom of the profile as well there. You'll see that there are a lot of people who are saying that they're comfortably well off in that mid-range. So a lot of it's about expectations. How much money do you need to retire and what are your expectations? So people are making comfortable lives out of not as much income as you might expect. But when we talk about retirement adjustment, what are we actually talking about? What does it mean to be adjusted in retirement? Well, it means all of these things. We want people to say nay to all of these things that are listed on the screen. We don't want them to have concerns about their finances. We don't want them to miss the stimulation that work gave them. We don't want them to regret the fact that they didn't start to plan earlier. They don't miss the discipline of work. They don't feel that they're less respected than they were when they were at work. They haven't had to adjust to a big drop in income. They don't miss being part of the action, and it's turned out better than they expected. So we want them to say nay to all of the things on this slide, and we want them to say yes to all of these things, yay to all of these things. That they're well adjusted, they feel well adjusted to the changes, they're enjoying themselves, they're busy, it's better than expected, and also that they're enjoying time with their spouse or partner. Sometimes, unfortunately, it can be just the opposite, which will have an impact on retirement adjustment as well. So are there some things that we know about from the research that could help in terms of trying to influence this outcome? Are there some things that we could be doing differently? Well, there are some things, and some things are easier to change than others. Income, for example, is a little easier to change than gender, not impossible, but certainly requires a lot more work. So when we look at these factors, some of them can be easily changed, some of them can't. But in terms of income is a pretty good predictor of overall retirement adjustment. There's a pretty good relationship between the two. Being married, so in Ben and Nancy's case, where we saw before, just having each other will help them to enjoy retirement more because they've got the company of each other. We do find that the longer that people have been retired and as they age, they tend to adjust better. They tend to report higher levels of adjustment. So it could be a bit bumpy to start with, but they grow into it. The results in the research for gender are quite mixed. Some studies say women adjust better, other studies say that men adjust better. If I had to put my money on any of the research that I've seen so far, I would say that women adjust worse to retirement than men. And that's partly due to the fact of how they find themselves in retirement. Often it's because they're following a partner into retirement. They might be having to take on additional caring responsibilities either for parents or for children. And because they've exercised less choice, then they feel less adjusted. Let's imagine, for example, that Nancy had to give up a job that she found very satisfying and rewarding to stay at home and look after Ben's parents. There might just be the tiny bit of resentment in there that she wasn't able to make that decision freely and for herself. Okay, so what are some other factors that we can look at? Well, these are some factors that can be changed in organisations before people leave work and then also after they leave work. So let me run through each of these for you so that you understand what they mean, otherwise they probably will seem very irrelevant. The first one is conditions of exit. How much say people have about the timing of their retirement, how and when they leave work, is a good predictor of retirement adjustment. The more say that people have about the timing, the more likely it is that they're going to be adjusted. Now, when I do presentations like this to groups at retirees, invariably I'll get at least one person in the audience who wants to tell me about how their position at work was made redundant and how it's affected them. And they want to spend time telling me their story. Sometimes they'll email me afterwards, emails of up to 3 pages. And how has it affected them? Well, some of these people's stories are 20 years old. 20 years ago, they lost their job. They should have been kept on. Why was Bob kept on instead of me? I don't understand. It's not fair. No one ever told me or explained it to them. Now, this has an impact on the advice space because what it means is that people might have a bit of trouble moving forward. They might find themselves ruminating about that, getting stuck on it and not being able to push forward. They might need some additional help to be able to make that transition. And until you've dealt with that, you might just have to listen to that conversation many times. So I would be looking at that person, if they didn't get assistance from their organisation when they left, then getting assistance afterwards to help them to come to terms with whatever decision was made at the time. Now, work centrality probably doesn't mean very much to you except to say this. It's just a fancy way of saying how much people love their jobs and how much of their own identity is immersed in their whole idea of their work, and can they separate out work and their work identity and their personal identity. We did a study just recently that was published in the Medical Journal of Australia, and there was an editorial about it in the Weekend Australian in the business section. So if you've still got a copy of that around, you can have a look at it. But it was looking at the retirement planning behaviour of doctors, and not surprisingly, doctors delay their retirement beyond the average Australian person. And one of the main reasons that they do that is because of work centrality. This whole idea that their identity is immersed in their work, and that to retire means that they feel that they've got to give up their identity as a doctor, so they stay on for longer. Now, in that article, we make some very explicit comments in there too about being able to exit in a time that suits them and the importance of getting professional advice. So if you would like a copy of that, just email me and I'll send the articles to you. The other thing that we find is, in terms of work centrality, pleasingly, is that if people have high work centrality and then they leave work, they actually adjust pretty well. They don't have the sort of problems that you might think. I thought there would be this whole lot of, senior executives sitting in a corner somewhere, sobbing into their pudding. Why did I ever leave work? What have I done? But in fact, it's not like that at all. Most of them adjust pretty well. They're equally busy in retirement as they were at work. Mastery is about being able to feel that you're in charge of your own domain, that you've got everything that you need within yourself to be able to make the changes possible or to action a plan. So mastery is really about implementing the plan and feeling that you can do it for yourself. Now, this is an important predictor of retirement adjustment, because you could have a conversation with someone about, changing to a different mortgage product, but they might feel that if they go into the bank to have that conversation and they're going to be bamboozled by the bank manager, they might never get there. So the mastery piece is important. Might require a bit of role playing, for example. It would help. Pre and post-retirement planning. Retirement planning is a good predictor of retirement adjustment, not just pre-retirement but also during retirement. Those people who tend to plan more in retirement tend to be better adjusted. So every time you sit down with a client to have a conversation about planning, you're actually contributing indirectly to their retirement adjustment. It helps them to feel that they're more in control of their situation and that they feel like they've, with the mastery, got everything that they need to be able to make the changes that are necessary. The main one that I wanted to talk to you today is about resource accumulation, and resources means different things to different people, but resources, when I use it in my psychological research, is really about, if you like, different buckets of planning, different pools of planning that will be helpful to people to promote better retirement adjustment. Now, the model I'm presenting to you today, the dynamic model of retirement, is not my model. It was a model developed by an American researcher called Mo Wang, but it was untested. But I tested the model, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today in terms of my research. What actually matters and what matters more when it comes to planning for retirement. Well, the first one we know is finances. Finances is really important because it enables people to be able to support their everyday living expenses, and it usually represents a variety of sources: savings, superannuation, investments. Now, there are two key findings from the Multipurpose Household Survey that also support the fact that we know this is really important for retirement. One of them is the number of people who cycle in and out of retirement because they don't have enough money. So in the last Multipurpose Household Survey, when they compared it to the survey before, there were 185,400 people who were back out looking for work who'd previously retired in the survey. Back out looking for work again, 185,400 people. And when they asked those people why they were looking for work, there were two key reasons. One of them was that they didn't have enough money, and the second one was that they were bored. So could they have chosen their conditions of exit differently? Probably. It sounds like they probably could. The other thing that's interesting about finances is where people think they're going to get their money from. So, you know, people expect to get a lot of money out of their superannuation. So 59% of men think they're going to live off their super in retirement, but it's more like 28%. 49% of women think they're going to live off their super in retirement, and it's more like 13%. So there's a big difference in terms of where people think they're going to get their money from as well. So more planning in that area will help to manage those expectations and avoid unpleasant surprises. The other area that's really important is health, and health's important because you're trying to avoid an absence of physical and psychological illnesses, and you're also trying to make sure that people have enough energy and vitality to be able to do the things that they really enjoy doing. We know that this is important too from the Multipurpose Household Survey for two reasons. Firstly, about 40% of people think they're going to go from full-time work to part-time work. Now, that's going to be dependent on them maintaining good health. And if someone's sitting across from you and they tell you they've just had a triple bypass, they've got type 2 diabetes, and they have arthritis in their hips, the reality of being able to continue to work might not be realistic. They might need to retrain in a new area, they might need to scale back their work, and even working part-time might be challenging for them. So there's a strong correlation between health and retirement adjustment as well. The other thing we know is that people will have to leave work unexpectedly early due to poor health, and this affects their conditions of exit. So 19% of men and 14% of women will leave work earlier than they expected due to ill health. So people say, what's the one thing that people could do to make sure that they have a good retirement? I would say health. Look after your health. You know how your grandmother used to say, your health's your wealth? She was right. I've just taken me this long to get there to prove it. So motivation, being able to overcome barriers when you hit hurdles is important. Being able to continue to plan and making sure that that plan's realistic are both important parts of the motivational planning area. Emotional, being positive about your emotions and being able to recognise your own emotions, recognise the emotions of other people is an important ingredient too in terms of retirement adjustment. Social is important. Social is important because people will need a support network around them. And in this regard, we're talking about friends and family from a variety of different sources. People who have friends and family from a variety of different sources tend to fare better than those who are just highly dependent on one or two people. And lastly, cognition. This is an area where I think has been chronically under-researched and will need more attention in the future. Some things to know about this whole area of cognition though. People will unexpectedly believe that as they age, then they're automatically going to have dementia. But the reality is quite different to that. In fact, only 1 person out of 10 over 65, only 3 people over 85 are affected by dementia. That means that 9 out of 10 people between 65 and 85 will be well, and 7 out of 10 people over 85 will be well. Majority of people will be well. What happens though is if people start to second guess themselves and they think that they've got dementia when they haven't, you might find them withdrawing from planning and other activities as well. You know, the typical comment I'll hear from people is, I'm not going to bridge anymore because I can't count the cards and I'm worried other people will notice. But there are lots of reasons why people may have these sometimes temporary declines, and if they withdraw from the outside world and from stimulation, then affect behaving like they do have dementia. And the other thing that we find is that they will withdraw from social support, which is important for other reasons. So recognising these things is important as well. But I guess this brings you to the question of, well, do some things matter more than others, and they do? When we had a look at our research, we had a look at what were the best predictors, and they were in this order. Finances and health were the most critical, then social, and then cognitive, emotional, and motivational, in that order. So the order's important as well. The most important, finances and health, then social, then cognitive, emotional, and motivational. Now, it's good for people to know about this as well, because if their resources go up and down and they're feeling like they're not coping very well, you can let them know it's quite normal. You know, that as these resources do go up and down, then you are likely to feel differently about retirement. So let's go back to Ben and Nancy. Remember Ben and Nancy? Just refresh yourselves about their situation. When you think about this scenario now, knowing what you know, what are some things that you might be particularly aware of and attuned to? And I want you to overlay it with this, which was the slide we looked at that had a look at the different domains, the different areas of planning. Where do you think the soft spots are going to be for Ben and Nancy? What's going to be low, medium and high in terms of those different areas? What are some things that you're thinking about now that maybe you weren't so conscious of before? What are some things that might need attention? Let's have a look at where we believe the soft spots would be for Ben and Nancy. Well, there's a couple of things to have a look at. Sorry, I've gone backwards again. These are the potential results that we think you would see from Ben and Nancy. Firstly, finances looks like it's about medium, but when you have a look at the other areas that could require attention, we've got Nancy's health as a particular issue. And why is that important? Well, it's important because Nancy's got a lot of responsibility. Nancy's looking after herself as well as Ben's parents, and if her health goes down or she's out of the equation, that's going to create a whole lot of additional issues as well. So we need to look after Nancy. Now, luckily for us, we had a very astute advisor, because do you recall that Nancy doesn't have very much to do with managing the finances at all, that you might have only seen Ben. And if you hadn't gathered this information from Ben, or you haven't met Nancy, then half of this story would be missing. Half of their story would be missing. So what can you do about these things? Now that you know that these are potential areas, what can you do? Anyone in here able to diagnose Alzheimer's or dementia? No? Oh, well, that's the end of that story. No, of course not. You know, no one in here is a professional careers advisor, I don't believe. I could be wrong. Am I wrong? No, I'm not. No one's a psychologist. No one's expecting you to be able to do all of these things. But I think there is an opportunity to broaden your network in terms of other people that can assist. More and more, I think this issue of retirement is going to be about multidisciplinary approach. If there has to be an adaptive change process in this area, it's about that. It's about involving other people as part of the retirement planning process. And you might already have lawyers involved, you might already know of local doctors and have conversations with them, but the areas that you could potentially focus on are careers advisors and psychologists. There's a couple of websites there where you can find out people who work in your local area that can assist in both of those areas and that you could make referrals to, or that you could discuss issues with and potentially work together on. So, some things to consider, some things to reflect on. Is the plan realistic? Does it cover the top of the pyramid? Does the person have a plan, and do they feel that they've got everything within themselves to be able to action that plan? Can they do it for themselves? What's driving their exit from the workforce? Is it just their decision or a joint decision? When we looked at the doctors' research, that was very much a family decision. They were taking into consideration what the family wanted them to do, rather than just making the decision independently. There might be other people involved. What other allied professionals can you involve and connect with? So, in order to be able to plan more comprehensively, you know, the pitch is much bigger once we know the full story. We want to think about where people are going to live, what they're going to do when they live there, and who are they going to be living with? Is their health, are they well enough to be able to do all the things that they've planned in retirement? Can you help them to build mastery by seeing how they've made changes previously and how they can make changes in the future? That is, that they can use the same coping mechanisms they used before. Can you give them some feedback about how they're going in understanding the plan and about their financial literacy? They love it. Adults love positive reinforcement as much as kids do. Anything that you can do to reinforce they're on the right track will be highly valued by them. Also, understanding who the significant others are in the equation. You know, there's a lot of value in understanding Nancy's story in relation to Ben, and not just Ben's story alone. And lastly, I would encourage you to connect with a broader community. I do presentations like this to careers advisors, to psychologists, other groups within the community, so that they know about the work that you do, and that then they can understand also how they could help you and you could help them. And that's all I have to say today, so thank you very much for listening.